So in that nothing, in the silence, there is also the everything. And I know we started off a few weeks ago with the dark, and then last week we talked about how our body interacts with everything in movement and in stillness. And you would think in a week that we do silence, it would also be dark, but we can have silence in the complete brightness of everything. They don't have to be separate. So just as there is dark, there is also light. And just as in the body, we have matter, there is also energy and soul and spirit. And that silence can bring meaning to all of it. It's a place for us to regroup, a place for us to reform, or to even form. So if you think about a baby, when they are in the womb, it's quiet, right? And yet it's really loud. You have the heartbeat of the mother. You have, in fact, we know that having that heartbeat sound, even after they are born, is comforting because that is the silence that baby knows, that pulse that helps us grow and develop. And then we're being called all the time to find where our pulse is still, to help us keep growing and developing. And if we recognize the world around us and how we even live our lives, there's pauses all the time. And I don't know that we always recognize our pauses. There's pauses and rests in music. There's pauses in poetry, in our speech, in the seasons, and even in our breath. If we pay attention to our breath, there's often a little pause between the inhale and the exhale. Think about that silence is holy and that it brings meaning and that it draws our attention. And in that silence is our awareness. And it's always there. It's just whether we're choosing to recognize it or not. In Orfield Laboratories in Minnesota, there is a sensory deprivation lab chamber, which voids out all external sounds. So when you go into the chamber, you are the sound, your thoughts, your breathing, your heartbeat, the gurgling of your stomach, all of that. Those are the sounds. Now, Stephen Orfield, who's the one that founded this lab, in an article to the Smithsonian Magazine, he said, in that place where we become the sound, it's hard to orient. That if somebody is in there for up to 30 minutes, they need a chair because they no longer are able to orient themselves on even how to walk. Which is interesting to know that the things that we don't pay attention to and our connections to everything, even if they are silent connections to us, help us maneuver through the world. He also says that the longest somebody's ever been in that chamber is 45 minutes, that it becomes that discomforting for people to have the lack of input from the outside. So in the quiet, we need to orient ourselves, right? And that chamber is a pretty big reminder of that. So, but how do we orient ourselves? How do we turn to awareness, to that still small voice in ourselves? It's like reminding ourselves that in the silence, our intuition is intact, and that's an orientation. That we are connected to the all that is, to creation, to God. And that the universe is always connected and talking to us. I want to share with you this little clip, if I can get it up here. Give me just a sec. So NASA has played with this idea of the sounds of the universe, and they have actually recorded For as far back as the Voyager spacecrafts that went off in the 70s. They have been able to record the sounds in the nothingness of space. And the idea is that even in that vacuum, there are frequencies moving back and forth that may be picked up. So I want to play you just a tiny one from Jupiter. That was recorded by the NASA spacecraft Juno. And it's the radio emissions from Jupiter's intense auroras. Now, in order to pick up these instruments, this sound, this music, in order to pick it up, they need special instruments that are calibrated in order to pick up things like radio waves and then change them into sounds that we can understand. Our bodies, our hearts, our minds are the same. We calibrate them. We allow them to tune in, to listen. So last week when we talked about listening to our bodies, not just for what it needs, but for that awareness. And practicing silence allows us to be aware. First of all, those sounds that we tend to ignore, right? And also that intuition that we are often not accustomed to hearing or even listening to. Because our connection is as divine to divine and divine to divine. You have 100% divine divinity within you that is always connected. And it's like, are we allowing our humanity to recognize that? Are we allowing our humanity to recognize that? Before I start to close up, we're gonna play with some intentional silence and then some intentional awareness. And Andrew is going to help us out by performing 4 minutes, 33 seconds by John Cage, and then moving into This Is What Love Is by Chad Lawson. Now, John Cage's piece is a practice in the ambient sound. And we'll talk about that more in a minute. So John Cage's 4 minutes, 33 seconds, and then we'll move into What Is Love by Chad Lawson. How many of you did well with the first part? How many of you were uncomfortable with that silence? Grabbed your phone, looked at the program, wondered what the heck Andrew was staring at. Sometimes that silence is hard, yeah? And yet there was so much information in that silence. So much, not just the sound of the building and the sound of the door and the sound of feet and the rustling of uncomfortable people, but also the sounds in our heart. You know, what made us uncomfortable? Where does your mind go? Where does your body go in that silence? And then where did it go as soon as the piano started playing a piece with notes instead of silent spaces? What part of you is calling yourself to be aware? What talents within you are calling to be noticed that we shimmer our uncomfortable selves out of when it starts to come to the surface? Take some time this week in the silence. I know I've been asking you to sit with the candle until it goes down a little bit. This was 4 minutes and 33 seconds of silence. Start there. Expand it. You don't have to do anything. Just observe. Observe how you are in that silence. And then once we're more comfortable with it, And then we can shift to it in those moments that we really need that extra guidance. Or we can hear when the guidance is actually there and we don't shuffle ourselves or look at our phone and get right out of it. You can take some time to actually write this week. Since I knew I was talking about this, I've been practicing it more myself. I've been intentionally writing once a day with an actual pen and paper. Right. Because it slows us down. It recognizes everything in those in-between places. And all that silence that isn't silent, just like we heard from Jupiter. You would think a spacecraft running around in space would be like a big nothing hole, right? And yet going past Jupiter, there's all that sound and recognition. I want to close with some thoughts that were inspired by Avery Ingram from the piece he wrote called The Silence. And Evie joined Unity School in 1919. So some of these thoughts are getting back there, right? But these are inspired by what he wrote. So be still and know that I am God. Do not worry about appearances or lack of appearances. In perfect confidence, look toward the land that lies beyond the silence, knowing that from beyond the stillness, from beyond your own uninformed states of consciousness, from beyond your doubts and your fears, will come the light that shines in the darkness. And in the light will be revealed a vision of that which you are in God, which you are in the universe. And God is you, all of you. Each day you bring forth that realization. Each intentional silence, bringing into focus your talents, your spark, your unique perspective, and your purpose within the one.